the idea of how James uses the word murder in verse 2. Talking about how their quarrels, the source of quarrels and conflicts among you are what? Is not the source your pleasures that wage war in your members? And then verse 2 does seem to imply there's a carryover of this idea of premeditation, as if there is a plan, a willful decision to murder. And Andrew walks in the room, and I go, I'll let him try to describe it. We were trying to pick up with where you had mentioned a concept in the use of the word murder in verse 2 of chapter 4 that showed maybe in the context of that which is premeditated or that which is planned, as in a warfare. And it is a parallelism, if that is here in the scriptures, is that you wage war in your members. I don't think that means members of the church. I think that means within the members of your body. The makeup of the composition of me is the members of my body, my individual components. And there is a source of conflict because I want what I want, and what I want may not be good for me, and it may not be good for you. And the language here is trying to address this idea of what's happening within the body of Christ among these Jewish believers. What is going on that James would use such strong language as to accuse them of being murderers? And Andrew, does any of that come back to you now about how you were helping us understand how that word might be used? Or did you make all that up on the spot?
Well, I think I based it on, I was comparing translations, and I think it was the Young's literal translation, which said, whence are wars and fightings among you? Is it not thence, out of your passions, that are as soldiers in your members?
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, go ahead and read verse 2 for me from the Young's, please.
Sure. Ye desire, and ye have not. Ye murder, and are zealous, and are not able to attain. Ye fight and war, and ye have not, because of your not asking.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of members being described as soldiers, I don't think I used the word premeditated, but that it was almost a reactionary or an instinctive response to turn to as it were, violence.
Mm-hmm.
Not literal violence, but I'm trying to think of the other word that means not literal in this case. Figurative violence.
Figurative violence. I inserted premeditated from looking at Strong's and the use of the word. And it is used, the word itself is used in the same way that it would use any condemnation of looking at someone saying, I want to kill them, I'm going to kill them, I've killed them. That's murder. And murder is not manslaughter. Murder is not an accidental death. Murder involves premeditation. But that's consistent with what this is saying about how there is an ongoing struggle to satisfy yourself, and you're willing to put other people's well-being in jeopardy because of your interest in yourself. And so I did pose the question. I don't remember getting a really satisfactory answer to the question of, is James just talking about in general how people just fail to get along because that's what we do? Or do you think he knew of specific instances within the brotherhood that he was trying to quell, trying to put down? And maybe you see something in here that helps you answer that question, and maybe you don't. But I thought it was worth thinking about. We're talking about something that is I don't know if Andrew was trying to say this or not, but part of our nature, this conflict being part of our nature in our quest for getting our way, which is to put other people in jeopardy, to plan for their hurt, a murder, if you will. And I would use that word comfortably myself. If I was to just get to the point where I couldn't even look at Brace any longer, we couldn't have a civil conversation. And we've come to such an impasse that when I see him in a service van or I see him here at the building, and I don't acknowledge his existence or presence, and he's trying not to create a scene, so he probably feels uncomfortable with that from me, and probably won't engage openly in a conflict amongst us all. But can I not use that idea of putting someone to death in that I have given such disregard and such neglect to the relationship for them as to be, I have put that relationship to death. I have killed that relationship. Yes, Gil.
I think that's what John says in 1 John 3:15, that the one who hates his brother is a murderer.
Yeah.
And I was thinking there was a passage in Matthew, the 12th chapter, and I can't find it now. I don't have a cross-reference to it. It seemed to me like there was something in Matthew 12 that would coincide with that thought.
Yeah. And I find that curious because I made myself a note that there seems to be a lot of common themes between James chapter 4 and James chapter 4 and James chapter 5 and 1 John chapters 2 and 3. I think they're both trying to deal with a lot of the same issue in the early church. And both the language they use and the context in which they frame these things end up being very similar in how they approach the issue of whose child are you? And I think that's the way this is going in James. So he's laying out this idea, of this model in front of them of this is what I am seeing. I am seeing aggression toward one another, quarrels and conflicts. I'm seeing it is as if there's soldiers on the battlefield among your members, amongst themselves, and I think within themselves as well. And you ask and you don't receive. You ask with wrong motives, so that you can spend it on your pleasures. And then verse 4. You adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Whose child are you? Is what I'm hearing when I read these verses. And James has laid it before them. When I see this going on, when I see this level of hedonism and seeking after pleasure and putting other people's interests behind your own, and then I go, who do you belong to? Or do you belong to the world? Do you belong to God? James is posing a question in a way that I say he's calling them out, but he's probably doing it in about the most gentle way he knows how here, to just stop and reflect. This doesn't sound like someone who could be a friend of God and be acting in this way. There's an enmity here. And so he's challenging them to think about, what the scriptures say about these kind of attitudes and these kind of behaviors. Again, I think James is always very careful to tie an attitude with a behavior, with a result, with an action. I think James does that here. I think he's noticing a condition of worldliness, and he ties that to their outward behavior towards one another. And he says, whose child are you? Think about it. That's how I'm reading it. I feel like it's a very introspective way to get about the question. It makes me think about, as he delves further into this, there was a good part of the ancient world in this day and time. The Jews got swallowed up in this as well, where there were philosophies that actually espouse the ideas that seeking after pleasures and seeking after things of this world and participating in the carnal was actually a pathway to opening your mind and attaining a higher purpose in life and attaining a higher relationship with God through these activities of carnal pleasures. And how much did that permeate the Judean world before Jesus arrived on the scene? How much of that permeated the early church as people came out of these foreign philosophies, these Greek philosophies, Roman, probably more Greek than Roman, Greek philosophies? And how prevalent were these ideas? And so, I mean, the fact that the scriptures talk about them and the way that they approach this conversation, I have to think these things were negatively impacting the church. And James said, pick a side. He uses the language of warfare, he uses the language of soldiers, and he's challenging them to pick a side and stay on one team instead of trying to cross back and forth between two spirits. Any thoughts on this? Yes, ma'am.
I'm reading out of the ESV, and it was a complete turnoff how many times it uses the word you. It's 13 times within 3 or 4 verses. That's a turnoff to me, is that it's obvious that if the main point in these verses is you, something's wrong.
It doesn't help that he then uses a very derogative term after all these yous. He says, well, you guys are actually this, You are spiritually adulteresses. That means you have become one with someone who's not God. That's the accusation as I read it in plain English. You have become one with the world. You're unfaithful in your relationship to God. And that unfaithfulness to God is manifesting in itself in the way that you treat one another. This is some serious stuff that's being discussed here. This is a problem in the early church. If James has to have this kind of conversation to this depth of particulars and how he's saying it, I see a people that are really struggling. They're still Christians. They're still God's people. They still have access to salvation, but they're really struggling. And I don't know where my head has been altogether in the last year, but I see evidence more and more that we really struggle, and we don't want to let people know about it. We don't want to talk about it. And we have challenging relationships, and we have challenging situations in our lives that are really contrary to what we believe to be biblically patterned. And we don't want people to know how we feel. We don't want people to know how vulnerable we are to some of our own passions and our own sinfulness. And I think if we could learn to share those burdens with one another in a more positive way, without the judgmental attitudes, without the rush to judgment and criticism, then we could help each other with these things. One of the fears I have of the church today is that we become accustomed to acting and believing as though everyone else's life is going along just fine. And I'm the only one who's struggling, and I don't want anyone else to know about it, because I feel like the odd duck. I feel like I'd be judged for it. I feel like I'd be criticized for it, ostracized for it, made to feel even lower than I feel because of my own sinfulness and my own weakness. And so I keep it to myself. And I think James wants us to work this out. Pick a side. Let's not play the game. Let's not play along to get along. Like I said, I'm sorry if this sounds like the musings of an old man looking back on a life. But I've had a lot of challenges recently. And those challenges have made me stop and think about what it is I'm seeing versus what I want to see. Can I see the truth for what it is, or I just want to see my version of the truth? And I'm getting the impression from even people that are close to me that we're more comfortable with projecting what we want people to see instead of what we need for people to see about ourselves. There's a friend of mine who doesn't attend church here. And the comment they made to me today over a text was, I'm pretty good at hiding and bottling up my feelings about things. And I wrote them back and I said, that is not an attribute. That's not a point of strength. And they admitted, no, you're right, it's not. But for a Christian to say, I'm really good at hiding my true feelings, that sent a chill through me. For two reasons. One is I care about this individual. And the second is, I don't think it's a unique problem. I don't think it's a unique problem. We study James and other books to change the way we live. And I think I told you, I'm growing dissatisfied with reading the same thing over and over again and doing nothing about it. And I hope you feel a level of discomfort when I say that too. And I say it as lovingly as I know how. James said you're playing a game because you're letting your own passions interrupt your relationships with one another. And he says, you're going to do something about this. Don't think that the Spirit speaks to no purpose. Verse 5. James says, this is supposed to change the way you are when I say things like this. And when God says things like this. And when God speaks to us through His Spirit, do you think that the Spirit speaks to no purpose? Does God just tell us this stuff for His own good or for our own good? He jealously desires the Spirit which He has made to dwell in us. You think about that. For James to say that right after he makes this accusation among them, and what that means. Think about what that means. We're not hiding anything from God. We are totally glass transparent before God. Whether we confess our sins to Him or not, whether we confess our anxieties and our fears to Him or not, we are 100% transparent to God. He reads us like a book. He owns the book. He wrote the book. And he says, do you think the Spirit says this? There's a jealousy. God is jealous of the Spirit that He has made to dwell in us. God owns us, is what James is saying through the Scriptures. And for God to ask things of us is not an imposition. We are His property. Our eternal soul is God's property. And that sounds pretty hard about God's jealousy. But, verse 6, He gives a greater grace. Therefore it says, God's opposed to the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. Thank God. Thank God. That when God owns me, and I can't live according to his law, I can live according to his grace and mercy. That's not an excuse to sin. That's not an excuse not to try. Sometimes just the effort to put down the conflicts and quarrels among us is as far as it's going to get. Because it takes two or more to stop quarreling. Right? Does that excuse me from making the effort? Well, I can't do anything about them anyway. That's on them. Does that excuse me from making the effort? I don't believe it does. God is jealous for our spirit. And God owns our spirit, but yet he gives grace to the humble and opposes pride. And you know what? When you come right down to it, the first 3 verses of James chapter 4, could you also just insert pride there and be still pretty accurate to the text? Couldn't you? I think you could. Draw near to God, verse 8, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. What's double-minded? This is an easy one.
Where you think one way and act another, maybe?
Think one way, act another. Yeah, double-minded. Sometimes you're on one side of the fence, sometimes you're on the other side of the fence. I think that's double-minded too. And like I said, I think what James is trying to say with all these remarks is pick a team. Pick a side. And go with it. God already knows your heart. He already opposes the proud. Are you going to pick a team? Are you going to submit to God? And then the devil will flee. Draw near to God, he'll draw near to you. Cleanse your hands. There is repentance that is necessary in these verses. There needs to be a change of heart that leads to a change of behavior. And it won't resolve everything. It won't fix everything. But the effort, the attempt on my part is what I will be held accountable for. Not whether or not I'm successful in resolving every conflict. Would you agree with that? Why, verse 9, why be miserable and mourn and weep? Is this a shift? Is this a new topic? Or not? I think it flows pretty much expected from what we just read in the first 8 verses. Why do I say that? What's James trying to get them to understand?
He's going into where they ought to turn their attentions to. But because their attentions have been away from God, there needs to be an emotional reaction as well as just there's a practical realization, but I think there's an emotional aspect that has to affect people too for them to turn back to God. You can't just academia your way into repentance.
That's right.
Repentance is an emotional ordeal.
Godly sorrow is still sorrow. Godly sorrow means it's a feel, it's a hurt, and it's just as real as it can be. Godly sorrow is not some sort of artificial sorrow. It's a real emotion. Godly sorrow leads to repentance, but it's still a real feeling that spurs an action. Like Andrew said, it's not an academic exercise. I would also make the argument, based upon what James is going to talk about in the next chapter in particular, he has an even greater motivation to speak in this kind of language. And then I think he's going to talk about judgment being right at hand. The Lord is coming, and he's right at the door. James knows there's going to be some extra tough times for the church. And he knows members of the church will lose their lives during these trials. And he knows that there is a warfare that is beyond these individuals, and they're just getting swept up in it. And so there's all the more emphasis on the need to get busy. Yes, Andrew?
Just thinking about all these verses, I think it's important to not think, oh, well, then passions are something that need to be stamped down or that they're wrong. I think these verses point us toward the idea that they are put there by God. Our nature of being passionate beings is our created nature. God is a passionate being. God has strong emotions. God chooses to describe himself as wild, untamed horses and war horses.
Mm-hmm.
So, he has a passionate spirit as well. I think what he's warning them of is, that passion, because we have it, we're created with it, it's going to seek something to apply itself to. And if not to God, then they're going to try to spend it on themselves. They're going to try to seek out something else to passionately pursue. And the fact that he says it's the spirit that God made to dwell in you, but he still has the capacity to be jealous for it, meaning we can take that spirit and then turn it towards something other than God, so that God still wants that spirit to be directed back toward him. It speaks to the fact that he gives us that nature or that spirit. That doesn't mean that we're to use it as an excuse when we misuse it. God expects us to rise above just our nature and be able to bring it under control. And I had a place where I was going with all this, and it escapes me now.
He sounds more like his dad every day.
But just that it's not just a black and white, well, passion's bad, so we need to be dispassionate, we need to be flat and cold and calculating. That's not what God wants at all. He wants fire, he wants passion, he wants unpredictability and danger even in his people, but for him. And when we're not using it for him, we're going to get bored and find something else to spend it on.
I think that's well put. I have lamented recently about my own analytic nature. I think I used to brag about it and say the same thing. In even my understanding of God and my spiritual side. And as Andrew said, you don't cast out the intellect, but if there's no fire, if there's no heat here, how can you be God's creation? How can this be the spirit that God put within us? We see the heat of God, the passion of God in so many ways. And he's passionate for his people as much as he is passionate towards righteous indignation when that's what is needed. And in my notes, I got this very verse going right back to verses 1 and 2. The mourn and weep and all that. He's saying, come on, guys. How can you be that way toward people that you're trying to get to heaven with? To where you would disadvantage them for your own pleasure. You've got things you need to be mournful about. And like I said, hard thinking and hard conversations have to go with these things. Yes, sir. And I think it too, we want to remember that as a single narrative, as a single letter, that James has already talked about, the sweet water and the brackish don't come from the same stream in talking about the tongue. But that should also be equally true of the spirit of man. We can't have these attributes that are in the fruit of the Spirit and then turn around and treat one another like we treat one another. It's just illogical. It's inconsistent. And so there's a lot here that I think really is meant to challenge our concept of who we are in the eyes of God. I believe James is really getting to the heart of things in this chapter to say, okay, I've given you some practical things to work with. And yet this is what I'm seeing going on. And yes, controlling your speech is going to help a lot in some of that quarreling and conflict that goes on in your life, for sure. Absolutely. But it's getting to the core of whose child are you first that's going to impact the speech and the behavior and the greediness and the passions that you war over. All comes back to the same root. Always comes back to the same root. The spirit that God put within you. What is the nature of that man that's inside of you? The nature of that person, that woman inside of you? What is that true nature? And are you willing to do two things? Hold up the Word of God as a mirror and look at that true nature. And are you willing to glance into the glass when someone else is trying to position it so that you can see your true nature? And both of those can be very challenging. We put up defenses. We want to preserve that which we are. It is, again, by our nature. Why should I change? I'm perfect just the way I am. I'm happy with the way I am. And this is making us really work here on these ideas. What else have you got for me? I appreciate the comments. I know this is kind of heavy stuff. I'm sorry that I can't make it more lighthearted for you, but I don't think it should be taken lightly. When I read mourn and weep and be miserable, it's hard to take that in a lighthearted way. And these are imperatives, aren't they? Aren't these basically put in the tone of an order? It's not, it'd be great if you could be miserable and mourn and weep. They're put in the imperative. Do not speak against one another, brethren. We're back to that tongue again. Imagine that. That which flows from the heart. He who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you're not a doer, but you're a judge. There's only one lawgiver and one judge, the one who's able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? It's been challenging to me as I have gone through some difficult emotions as to how I'm presenting myself to you. And I've had several of you comment on seeing me hurting really badly and being very concerned for me. And I have to say, even though I don't exhibit it at the time, perhaps, I'm very appreciative of all those who would be concerned for my well-being. But on the other side, I feel only in the last couple of weeks that I've had an epiphany. I've had a change that I can't even quite put my finger on. To where I feel as though I have come back to who I am as a person better than I've been in 3 years. And I'm getting feedback as recently as yesterday that someone who's concerned about me, and I believe that concern is legitimate, saying, Greg is unwell. He is unhealthy. And though I believe it's spoken out of love, it's still difficult when you're getting then people that reach out to you and they say, well, how are you? And I say, I'm doing great. And they're going, that's not what I'm hearing. And I said, well, some things change faster than you expect. And I was really, really challenged by some of my emotions. And I've gotten a decent handle on where my mind is on some of these things. It's not completely worked through, but I'm far, far ahead of where I was. And then I hear, well, someone judging my state of mind from a third party. And it kind of stings because you think, I wish that they had consulted me so that I could express to them that, yes, I have been in a dark place, but I've been blessed by that dark place. I have been blessed because it's helped me to evaluate all the good that is in my life and all the good people in my life and all the relationships that I value and cherish. And by that, being in the house of mourning, I have come back not just to where I was, but I believe there's been a reset in me that's been very positive and very good. And it's more difficult to move forward when you're hearing from other sources, well, Greg's just a basket case right now. I admit I came close to a mental breakdown in the last month. I'll admit that to you. But I'm doing so much better, and better than I was before all of this started. It's been a combination of everything in my life, I would argue. But lots of heavy things on my mind. When we have a brother who's hurting, let's not go and tell someone else out of our deep concern about so-and-so hurting. If you want to really express a deep concern, go to that person and find out what you can do to help. You don't want to learn that it gets back to them, that they heard the things that you said about them, and that person feels like all I want to do is defend myself. I've said it now, I don't know how many people, it doesn't apply in my context really, but you cannot stop the birds from flying overhead, but you can prevent them from building a nest in your hair. And the things that are said are often out of my control, out of your control. But if I'm going to let that settle in and to begin to bring me down from where I want to be in my journey, let's not you and I be the person that's that bird trying to settle in their hair by the things that we say about one another. Judging is not just about judging someone's sinfulness. Because I think if it was only that, you could make a strong argument that's righteous judgment. But that's not the kind of judgment that James is talking about here. He says when you've put yourself in the position of judging others, you've risen above accountability yourself. And it's not uncommon for me to be more critical of the faults I see in other people when they are my own faults than the things I don't have a problem with. That's a human nature thing too. When I have battled the same problem in my life, and I know that's a deficiency of me, I tend to be more critical when I see that same attitude in you, as opposed to things that I don't have any firsthand experience with. And so I'm an expert. I know all about that particular weakness. I know all about that particular sin. So I feel at liberty to pontificate about it and tell everyone else, well, you ought to know so-and-so. They're really, man, someone needs to shape them up. I have to be careful because, again, I think I know what I'm talking about because of the things that are in my life. And I think I'm helping when I'm probably not. I feel like I'm doing it out of compassion, and I may not be. Yes, sir.
James asked a question down there, what is your life? I think the answer to it is a classroom. He challenges us to prepare for the final exam.
Yeah, there's a couple, perspectives that he puts us in the last part of James chapter 4. I got to flip down to verse 16 real quick too, being just what I was talking about. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. I think I know better because I've lived it. So I can tell you all about it. And that may just be boasting my arrogance. Yes, ma'am.
Me?
Yes.
If you don't mind, what you were describing, for me, exactly matches what Romans 8:28 says, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. Even if it hurts.
Yeah. I would almost say joy, especially when it hurts. You know that? Because what do we get from the house of mirth, the house of parties? We get a good time. What do we get from the house of mourning? We get introspection and self-revelation. And we get endurance, which builds character. And I feel like I've been on a character building journey and I didn't want it. And I can look back and say it's really, really hurt. But I can also say it's been a blessing. And I'm not going to break down and cry over it this time. Because I can really see that. And like I said, it's almost been an epiphany. It's almost been just an aha moment that of all the things that I thought haven't gone the way I wanted them to go, maybe they've all gone exactly the way that God wanted them to go for my good. And I may never be able to answer that question definitively in my lifetime. I may never know whether or not this was his intention or just my dumb luck or just a combination of circumstances outside of my control. But what I can say is that I've been blessed for it. And I thank God for it. Well, no one's going to top that for a closing comment, so we're going to have to close the class. Unless you want to try.